Are you an adventurer looking to take your hunt to the next level? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to East Meets West Hunt with your host, Bo Martonic.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the East Meets West Hunt podcast presented by onX. The onX Hunt app is the premium app available for hunters, by hunters, to be your mapping solutions right at your fingertips. You can utilize the maps online from your computer, desktop, laptop, and also on your phone. Everything syncs together and is really nice for scouting, whether you're in the field or at home in the office. And so one of the things that I like to do with onX, and you'll hear a little bit of so Nathan, who I'm interviewing in this podcast here, brings up, is talking about finding east-facing points and east to west ridges, and meaning that, you know, on those east-facing sides, a lot of times the deer are using that for bedding with primarily westerly winds. And so by taking, looking at the onX maps ahead of time on the Hunt app, identifying some of the eastern-facing slopes, marking them, and then going in and get boots on the ground to be able to confirm some of your suspicions is always a great tool to be able to use. So if you want to head over to onxmaps.com, use the coupon code EMW. That'll save yourself 20% off of the Hunt app. And the University of Elk Hunting. So Corey Jacobson and Elk 101 have put together the most comprehensive elk hunting learning course available. It has a whole bunch of information from the beginning, from right now when you're looking at scouting using onX, and looking at Go Hunt to figure out where you're going to be going with the draw. With the draws coming out now and applying for states, or whether you're going over the counter. The University of Elk Hunting teaches you every aspect of that, whether you're a beginner or you're been an elk hunter for many years. There's a lot to learn from within the online course. And if you want to check that out, you can use the coupon code EastMeetsWest, and that'll save yourself 20% off of the University of Elk Hunting online course, available at elk101.com. And so the Tethered Phantom is the new saddle that Tethered released here just at the ATA show, and I have not had a chance to use it in the woods yet, but I had a chance to play around with the actual Phantom at the ATA show and sit in it, and also use the Mantis saddle all of last year. And this thing is awesome, all day comfort. And what they're doing with that is, they added the comfort channels, which is a patent pending solution that provides the all day comfort, because you can have high, medium, and low support settings, and you're able to, adjust those with one hand. And it's very nice to be able to do that, as well as the UtiliBridge, which basically this is a fully adjustable on-demand bridge that you can adjust depending on the angle of the tree, and really be able to furthermore hunt any tree, hunt in a location. You're not having to worry about the tree you're getting in. So those are some of the key features of the new Phantom saddle that's available now for purchase at tetherednation.com. So go over there and check that out. And last but not least, Exodus trail cameras. So Exodus right now is running a sale where if you go over on their website, the Lift 2 cameras that you can get at a great discount. And what they're doing with those is you can get $50 off the Lift 2 cameras if you're using the code SPRING20. And that's only for the first 100 orders, which this started last week. So as of the update I got today, they are low on stock, but they still have some available. So you might want to check that out. The Lift 2 cameras, I've been using those now for a couple years. 5-year warranty that they come with it, which is one of the biggest things with Exodus, is their 5-year warranty. And in addition to that, they have a 5-year theft and damage protection. So if the camera gets stolen or ruined by a bear like mine did this year, you get 50% off the replacement. And also, when you call them or have any issues, their customer service is second to none. As you could probably see a trend in a lot of these companies that I work with, or the products that I buy from them, are usually companies that have a good customer service background. That goes a long ways. So that's a big value proposition there. And so and just to give you a little more detail on this Lift 2 camera, so it has really fast trigger speed and with unmatched video quality. So I started running the video setting on scrapes this year and really learned a lot by being able to do that. And with their little 2-inch viewing screen, you're able to set it up easily and view the photos right on the field on the fly. You don't need to even add, you don't need to carry an additional camera or something else in there to be able to check that. So if you have any questions about this special offer or see what they got left, feel free to shoot them a message on Instagram or Facebook, or just head over to their website, exodus.outdoorgear.com, and use the code SPRING20 to save $50 on the Lift 2 cameras. All right, so as far as news this week, the new hats released. I talked about that last week where they were going to be released on the website. And I got 6 new styles out there that are available for purchase. And actually was boxing up a whole bunch more tonight to ship out. Had a really good response to them. I'm pumped how these hats turned out. And if you want to head over to eastmeetswest-gift.com and click on the store, you can check those out. And I still have some Onyx memberships left. I'm giving out premium memberships, which is a $30 value with any orders over $40. And I'm running low on supply there, but I still have a few left if you want to head over there and check that out. And in addition to that, so on this episode, I'm going to be interviewing Nathan Killen. And Nathan sent me an article he wrote for the East Meets West blog here, the journal. And this complements this podcast really well and has some drawings, some maps, and some diagrams that help. When you're talking about like setup specifically, which we talk a lot about in this episode, it's really difficult to be able to, visualize exactly what something looks like. And so that I think this article is a really good complement to that. So as you're listening, you can go back and view it and kind of get an idea of how he's setting up on these areas and what he's talking about with these ridges. Nathan does an excellent job of portraying it, and this just really helps be able to, expand that a little bit more. So that'll be available now over on the website. So you can go to eastmeetswesthunt.com/journal and check out that article. And then lastly, I just wanted to say, give a reminder out, New Mexico's big game draw. If you're trying to apply for any tags in New Mexico, you want a chance to chase some trophy bulls, you need to apply right now. March 18th is the deadline here, so tomorrow. Make sure you apply for that. The one thing about New Mexico is it's a great state because there's no point system. So you basically have just as much, luck or I guess chances as the next person of doing that. I mean, there's some different things that are with the tag allotment for residents and, the guided draw and stuff that I'm not going to get into right here, but basically you have the same chances as other people with it. And the downfall of it is you have to buy a $65 hunting license if you're non-resident, even if you don't draw, it's non-refundable plus a $13 species application fee. So, that's kind of a little bit of a downfall there, but you could look at it as a positive too, because it helps increase your odds because not everybody wants to pay that. So like I said, check that out. New Mexico's DNR website and apply for that draw if you want to hunt trophy bulls. But anyways, just been out hitting the mountains pretty hard here, scouting, picking up a few sheds along the way, and just loving this time of year to get out in the woods with everything going on in the world right now with the coronavirus and COVID-19 and everything else, it's nice to still be able to, get away from that and be out in the woods where really I don't worry about that at all. So, which is obviously not a reality for our everyday lives. But anyways, I hope everyone enjoyed their weekend and, continue to have some luck either scouting, boots on the ground for some mountain bucks, or maybe e-scouting for some western hunts, whatever that might be. Good luck with that. And if you like the podcast, don't forget to go over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to it, give a rating and review. That really helps us out a lot. I greatly would appreciate that. All right, let's get into this episode here with Nathan Killen. All right, we're back for another episode of the East Meets West Hunt podcast, and tonight I'm joined on the line by Nathan Killen out of Virginia. What's going on, man?
Just hanging out, buddy.
Yeah, it's it's the end of February here as we're recording this, and I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to getting some spring scouting in.
Yeah, if this snow will finally leave us alone. I enjoy being out in the mountains when there's snow on the ground, but I like to shed hunt a lot. So obviously they're harder to find when you've got snow on the ground. So
yeah, I know how that is. And right before we started talking here, you and I were before we started recording, we were talking and I didn't realize that, you got as much snow as you did, being, down in Southern Virginia there, but you were explaining, the elevation that you're at and everything it makes it a little bit different than other areas.
Yeah, and actually we don't get as much snow now as we have in recent years. There's been times that I can remember, I don't know, it's probably been 15 years ago or so, but we've had, as much as 2 and 3 feet. So, but now that's pretty unusual. Most of the time on average, we'll have, a snowfall that's going to be between 2 to 8, 10, 12 inches. But, we don't get a whole lot of snow like you would out west or you would up north, but we definitely do have a bit of snow. So,
yeah. So, Nathan, I've been wanting to have you come on here for a while. You and I have been talking back and forth, and you hunt mountain bucks in Virginia and have been really successful at it in the past and everything, and just you and I talking back and forth, and I think you have a unique way of going about it. So I'd like to hear a little bit of a background on you and kind of your hunting style and the types of areas that you're hunting in Virginia there.
Well, of course, I've hunted Virginia, West Virginia, Ohio, and just a little bit in Kentucky, but 90% of my hunting is done here in the Appalachian Mountains of Southwest Virginia. I started hunting several years ago. Matter of fact, this past season was my 38th season, so I've been at it quite a while, and mostly been a bow hunter all my life. I've shot traditional equipment on and off some since the mid '90s, and actually the past few years, probably 5 or 6 years, that's all I've hunted with. But I actually bought another compound this year, so I'm going to hunt with it a little bit, and I've gotten into hunting backcountry style hunting here in Virginia too. We've got some pretty remote areas, and so we're able to take advantage of that. But and I've also gotten into hunting with the firearms a little bit too, which is actually what I killed my bucks with this year, mostly because of the deer population around here. It's not now the way that it was back in, say, the 80s and 90s, and so opportunity just isn't there like it used to be.
Mm-hmm. And with so do you mean like the deer densities are a lot lower than they were at that time frame?
Yes. Yeah. Things have just changed, between deer regulations, back in the 80s and 90s, timber harvest, was real prevalent. There was clear cuts everywhere, and I've heard even on your podcast, how important that is to deer. And for the past probably, I don't know, 15, 20 years, that's just hasn't been going on anymore. And a lot of bad years with no acorn mast, and it's just really taken its toll on the deer in the mountains and stuff, and people actually have almost stopped hunting the mountains.
Really?
Yeah. Most of your hunters around here now, focus more on farmland and private leases and stuff like that. So matter of fact, I'd say in the past 4 or 5 seasons hunting here in Virginia, I can count on one hand the number of hunters that I've run into in the woods.
Wow. With with that and say the not logging and some bad years with mass crop and everything, it still seems like you're killing some really good deer. And in some of the areas that we have in Pennsylvania where they're not doing logging and you have bad acorn crop years and stuff and not as much undergrowth, it seems like that the antlers really takes a toll on them as far as they're not really hitting potential. They're just not having the food, I guess, for it. But it still seems like for you that you're taking some pretty good bucks.
Well, yeah, it's just age, that's allowing them to, grow the size antlers that they are, and plus the low deer densities, there's not as much competition for the food and stuff. But actually, as far as age of the bucks, the past 5 bucks that I've killed have been a minimum of 5.5. And one of the ones last year, gosh, I don't know how old that deer was, but I would imagine he's 7, 8, 9 plus. He was just a horse of a deer. As a matter of fact, body wise, he was probably the biggest buck that I've killed here in Virginia.
Wow, really? That's some definitely getting some age on those deer. And then do you think, a lot of it has to do with the hunting pressure? Was that, even when you had higher deer numbers, were you seeing deer of that age, or is this somewhat new?
No, back in the 80s and 90s, I would imagine, the bucks 4 years and older, were very rare. There just wasn't that many of them being killed, and that's because we had such high hunting pressure. Most people were killing, 1.5, 2.5-year-old bucks, and now, you just don't have the hunter numbers on national forest, and these bucks are just able to, reach the ripe old age that is required to grow the larger antlers, and but yeah, that's what I think that it is, because it definitely isn't the nutrition.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. And so describe a little bit, kind of like the way the mountains that you're hunting there are, like some of the elevation and some of the way the terrain lays out. Because a lot of us listening and everything are in the Appalachian Range, but there's so much different terrain, and just again, you and I were talking about that before this, but kind of explain that a little bit if you would.
Well, of course, I'm in the Appalachian Mountains, and our elevation varies anywhere from down around 2,000 feet up to almost 6,000 in the highest peaks. But on average, I hunt in the, say, the 2,500 to 3,500, even 4,000 foot range there. But we have some really rugged mountains, and most of it is really thick with mountain laurel, rhododendron. In the higher elevations, you have a lot of spruce pine and hemlock, and just stuff like that. It's beautiful country, and in the foothills of it, you have some farmland. Just depend on where you're at,
Mm-hmm.
and which makes them pretty good hunting, especially when you have national forest that comes down in behind those farms, And if you're able, a lot of it has, easy access into those spots, but then they are areas that are pretty hard to get into behind some of those farms. So, that's one of the type areas that I key in on. But it's, just rolling ridges, a lot of hardwoods, just, really pretty country to hunt.
Yeah. When I was down, towards your way, but over in North Carolina there, I couldn't believe the rhododendron and how thick that stuff is. We have a lot of mountain laurel in certain areas in PA, but like not as much of the rhododendron, and that got pretty nasty in places.
Yeah, it's it can definitely make it a nightmare trying to get into and out of certain areas, especially if you're unfamiliar with an area or come off of a wrong ridge and trying to make your way back in the dark. And a lot of times I'll cut a trail through those spots and stuff, make it easier about getting in and out. But yeah, they can be like a jungle, really.
Yeah, you can get. I'm sure you can get lost and tangled up in there pretty quick.
Yeah, especially with the tree stand on your back or trying to get a deer out.
Yeah. You were mentioning a little bit about your 2019 season and how you killed a couple bucks with a gun. Do you want to talk a little bit about those hunts and just kind of give a brief synopsis of how that went?
Yeah, of course, the first buck I killed was with a black powder rifle. It was actually a buck that I had a little bit of previous history from in a couple of years leading up to last year, and but I was just hunting on the back side of a main ridge. Actually parked my truck at around 2,000 feet, and 2,500, and the top of that ridge is around right at 4,000. So I had crossed the top of that ridge and was hunting the back side of it. But actually, what I was hunting is at the end of that ridge is east-facing slope, and but that morning they were calling for a south wind, but it was about mid-morning. It was supposed to change over to a north wind, and so I timed it to where I would get up on top just around daylight, and once the winds changed, then I made my way on down where I was wanting to go, and actually, which was just right on the edge of that east-facing slope, and just as I was getting to where I was wanting to go, then the buck actually met me there at the same time. But then I ended up killing him. And then the second buck was actually a new area that I had never hunted before. I had been scouting it some this past summer. We do a lot of trail riding with horses and stuff. And there's several equestrian trails up there, so I had been running some trail cameras and would check the trail cameras, from the horses and stuff. They were easy places I could get to with the horse. And but I got a few bucks on camera, and anyway, started putting things together, and me and one of my buddies backpacked back in there for 3 days. And I think it was on the second day that morning I killed him. So,
yeah, geez, I mean, those are, I'll put a link here to your Instagram, but you have, there were two really impressive deer. I mean, two really impressive mountain bucks that you got this year, and you have a long list of them from the past, but just it was like I said, just pretty amazing that you're doing that, and I didn't realize that you were backpacking into some of these areas too. That's pretty neat.
Yeah, I absolutely love the backpacking, into an area. That experience, it just adds so much to the hunt, and I don't know, it's just something that I've kind of feel like that I've missed out on, the Western experience, because I've never hunted out west, so trying to do a little bit of that type hunting here. So
yeah, no, I like that, and what's like funny with me is I never did any backpack hunting here until after I went out west and did it, and then I was like, why can't I just do that, back here in Pennsylvania? And I've done it now I do it in turkey season a lot. I've done it for whitetails, and it's a lot of fun doing it that way. And I'm planning on doing some more of that this upcoming year. I backpacked into a new area in rifle season, and we were only there for really one day of hunting because not being able to hunt Sundays here, but it was a pretty neat experience, and there wasn't a sign of a person anywhere back in there, which was great.
Yeah, I just love that experience. It's something that there's just something about being back in the mountains like that in remote areas. And I tell you, I have just eat, sleep, and breathed whitetails for so long. It's just the way that I want to hunt,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's for sure. And so, Nathan, we were, you had sent over an article to me that I'm going to plan on. It'll be up on the website when this podcast releases. But you titled it "Mountain Bucks: A Mini Guide to Consistent Success," and it was filled with a lot of stuff that isn't really talked about a lot. And one of the big reasons I wanted to have you on here, because it was just different material. And one of the things, before we get into this in detail, you were texting me and you were mentioning about hunting bucks versus deer. And can you kind of explain what you mean by that statement? And let's get into a little bit of a discussion on your hunting style and what you're looking for.
Well, bucks, they're still deer, of course,
mm-hmm.
but they just behave quite differently than other deer. Especially once bucks get 4.5 years old and older. A lot of it has to do with the personality. Some bucks are just more social than other bucks, and does, the way that I like to look at it, their mamas, they have their little ones with them. So, taking care of them actually puts them out there in daylight hours and stuff like that a whole lot more than, say, a buck would, trying to take care of himself. He has nobody but himself to take care of. So, and those, of course, they have their little ones that they have to look out for. So I believe that just makes them more vulnerable, more so than, a buck would be. And bucks, they just, they use the terrain different than what does do. That they bed differently than does do. That they're all about themselves. And most of the time they're just hermits. And of course that, comes back to, personality and stuff. But, and I think that's what gets a lot of bucks killed. Some bucks that are more social than others, even at birth, the more social they are, the more active they're going to be during daylight hours. So, of course that makes them more vulnerable and stuff. And
yeah. And so, with that, being said, some of the ones that are more social and the ones that, aren't, that probably end up living to an older age and everything, what are you kind of finding of the types of areas they're living, bedding, and where, are you able to kind of find them in those daylight hours?
Well, I feel like does, they hang a lot closer to food than bucks do, so they're going to naturally be closer to areas that show, heavier deer sign. Bucks, I feel like they, bed away from food a whole lot more, and I think that they just like their seclusion a lot more. They really don't want to be bothered by other deer, and so they're going to choose more, I guess, areas that are more remote, away from say food and stuff like that. Just places that they can get away from other deer and not really be bothered. If that makes sense to you.
Yeah, Yeah, and I mean, guess what? Do those areas have anything that you find is like anything in common? You said a little bit further away from food and cover, but is there anything else in terrain that you notice that they like as well?
Well, for sure, it seemed like they definitely favor steeper faces. That's if possible have cover on them. And I've actually noticed that eastern facing slopes, bucks really like those because obviously you have the prevailing wind. That most of our wind comes from a westerly direction. And, of course, thermals, both of those is going to work together. And them being on a steep hill or face of a eastern facing slope, I feel like that once danger does present itself, it's really easy for him to get away from it. So, and I actually I think, whenever you're trying to hunt him along those places, that he feels comfortable about moving, but if you set up right, the wind will actually be in his favor, but it can actually be in yours too, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're try to explain it like this: if you have a ridge running east to west, and the buck is bedding on the eastern face, well, if you hunt kind of like the southeast side of that or corner of that, most of the time your wind is going to be blowing, out into nothing. And if you set up to where, he's kind of uphill from you, it just presents a perfect situation, actually.
Yeah. So that they would say his, exit trail from the bed or entrance trail would technically be above you, but the way the prevailing wind's coming across, it's in his favor because he's, able to smell as he's, leaving, or let's say leaving the bed or whatever. But you're just off enough that, it's kind of his blind spot almost.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if you, approach it from, the southeast direction, you can get in undetected, especially from the bottom. And to me, it's just a perfect scenario. But now, believe it or not, eastern-facing slopes are not that common. That there's not as many of them out there as you would think that they are. You can look at a topo map, and you'll have plenty of ridges that secondary ridges that run off of a main ridge that will have an eastern slope to it. But I'm talking about the eastern slope on the end of an east-west running ridge.
Okay. And that is true, that is tough to find. I know with one of the areas I was hunting this past year, I'm trying to think how the ridges ran, but anyways, it was set up for more of like a easterly, southeasterly wind, which is not as common, but that's the way the whole ridge ran, and even like the fingers that were coming off it, and the bucks were there, but I was having such a hard time figuring it out where they weren't as consistent, it seemed like, with the bedding, because the wind was never really in a good spot for them to be in some of those traditional places.
Right. And to be honest with you, as much as we would like for bucks to be, consistently in certain spots, I found that they just aren't. Not in these big woods settings. They seem really nomadic at times, but I do believe that there are certain types of places that they do prefer, and I really believe that if you can find an eastern-facing slope that has mountain laurel on it, and if you can find a setup along, where that eastern-facing slope transitions into the south-face slope, or even the north-face slope, it just depends on the direction of the wind as to which, would be better to set up on. But, generally, most bucks like to travel, down under the top. and I like to look for, maybe a little bench or a point or any kind of terrain feature along that eastern facing slope to set up on. I just think that it, creates a good scenario for both of you.
Okay, so you're not setting up more on the top. You want to get down on a bench or kind of off to the side a little bit there.
Exactly. Yeah, I've found that hunting the tops of ridges for older age class bucks, they just don't like to travel up there. Not during the daylight hours. They're most always on one side or the other, down below the top. And like here where I hunt, on generally on both sides of the top, just down under the top, there'll be a strip of some kind of cover, whether it's mountain laurel or rhododendron. Generally it's rhododendron on the north side and mountain laurel on the south side. But you can catch them cruising through that stuff.
Mm-hmm. So I guess, all right. So you're finding, some of the bedding to be, on these eastern facing slopes, and and you were saying off the top a little bit. I mean, do they, with as much elevation changes you have, can they? Well, and again, I know they can bed really anywhere, but do you find them more at even some of the lower elevations, or are you focusing up towards the top just from? Explain that a little bit, I guess.
Well, of course, I do feel like that bucks, whenever they can, would rather bed higher and feed lower. But a lot of it has to do with where the mast crop is. Some years, the mast crop could be widespread, and some years it may be at certain elevations. So I do feel like that where he's bedding would greatly depend on the elevation that you would find the acorns and stuff at. So, but some of these secondary ridges that run off the main ridge, well, really any secondary ridge should have cover on it. I think that creates great bedding spots for bucks. Any place that gives them, in my opinion, cover, an elevation advantage, and thermals or prevailing wind, whichever, it's going to create that. But to be honest with you, that there's thousands of those type of places in these areas that I'm hunting, and I'm sure it is the same way in Pennsylvania. So
yeah, that's what's so tough. I mean, there's there's trends you can look for and things, and sometimes it's still like finding a needle in a haystack, it seems like.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. But really, once you start narrowing down the sign and really paying attention to buck sign in general, you'll start seeing where these bucks are preferring to be. And because up here or down here in Virginia, which is going to be the same where you're at, you're still, even though the whatever's on this ridge is the same as the next ridge is the same as the next ridge, and so on. You're still going to have certain places that those bucks are just going to prefer to be. But it may take several days of hunting that spot before you even see him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and okay, so that's one of the points that you had mentioned about in this article that you wrote was about hunting, the same area, or the same spot, more than once. Where sometimes you hear, if you hunt an area and it's burnt out and everything, and I'm interested to hear your perspective on this. Is I've went back and forth on I've done different things. So I'd find a good spot that be during the rut, and I would sit there for 5-6 days because deer densities are so low. I'm not bumping them, going in and out, and just was careful about my, my entrance and my exit. But I knew if I sat in some of these travel spots that if I sat there long enough, I was going to have an opportunity, and normally I did. And then I don't know if it came down to, just wanting to either impatience or wanting to try, different things and try different areas. And I started being, hunting different places all the time, and, had a little bit of luck with that, but I'm kind of started going back to, spending at least a few days, in an area. And I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I definitely think that it's important to give a spot a chance here in the mountains because, the deer density is, a lot lower here than, say, broken farm type country, So it may take a few days for the buck that you're hunting, to make it back through because he's just using such a large area. But really, I think if you have good access going into a spot and you stay clean and you're getting in and out without spooking deer, there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to hunt that spot. I mean, if you're hunting that spot and deer are not picking you up as they're passing by you and going, doing their normal thing, then why would deer, pick you up afterward, after you're gone? So if you're able to get in and out clean and deer aren't picking you up while you're there, in my opinion, if you're in a good spot, you just don't need to be playing hopscotch because you're bouncing around way too much, So I will have a handful of spots that I feel like are high percentage spots, and I try to stick with them. Now that doesn't mean that while I'm hunting that spot, if I see some deer activity, going on, in another location, whether it's, sign that they're leaving or firsthand, sightings, I will definitely investigate that. And if I need to move, I will move because in my opinion, especially during, pre-rut time, if you see one buck do something, the next one through will most likely do the exact same thing that one done. So, you need to capitalize on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so when you're, say putting, these setups and your stand placement, how are you setting up? Are you setting up according to the bedding? Or are you setting up in what you would consider more travel routes, or like how are you kind of picking and choosing some of your stand placement, which I think can be one of the most difficult, but probably one of the most important parts of this whole equation?
Well, one thing that I don't do is hunt heavy sign. I feel like that catching a buck where there's a lot of sign, a lot of deer activity going on during daylight hours. Now, I'm talking, fully mature bucks. It's very low percentage unless he is actually with a doe, and given bucks and does, I feel like bed separately. Just like we talked about a little bit a while ago. So I start looking for areas in tangent to that, if that makes sense to you, and I concentrate that. Well, most of the time I'm closer to the bedding than I am the feeding area, or what have you, or and a lot of times, bucks, let's say a buck has, a home range of a couple of square miles. He's going to have several different bedding areas within that, and areas that he's going to, feed in, looking for does and stuff. So, and I think about it as point A to point B, or one area to the next. And I just think about, where's the most likely place that buck is going to come through from, point A to point B. And bucks, they just, I'm going to give an example here. I watched a buck one time. He was bedded, and he got up probably 45 minutes, an hour to 45 minutes before dark, and he fed around just for a few minutes, and then he just stopped and stood there. And I'd say he stood there for a good 30 minutes and never moved or nothing, just listening. And it was a really quiet evening. And once he decided to go, he never stopped until he was completely out of sight and out of hearing range. So I guess my point is sometimes bucks, whenever they decide they're going somewhere, there's no rhyme nor reason to how they get there. And you may have witnessed that before, but anyway, at times like that, or bucks, whenever they travel like that, they're really hard to pin down. But most of the time, between where they're bedding and feeding, there's some kind of it's the same thing everybody else looks for. Pinch points, edges, and every situation is different. So, but I tend to stick more toward their bedding area, or where I feel like that bucks would be bedding, versus closer to the feed, and any kind of funnel-like area in between. So
yeah, and
that's the same thing that's the same thing everybody looks for.
Mm-hmm. But like, so when you're all right, so you're looking like between the bedding and the feed, but all right, say you're assuming that the buck could be bedded on this certain elevation or bench just down over the hill. Are you going to try to stay on that same elevation line, just off, or how are you looking at that? If that's into your consideration?
Well, in my experience, most older age class bucks, let's say you have a bench that runs around the side of a mountain. And I don't know why, but my experience has been they'll either travel below the bench or above the bench, and they hardly ever walk the actual bench unless there's really good cover there or they're hot on the dough. And that there's probably different reasons for that. One, maybe I feel like that most hunters would choose to set up on that bench,
mm-hmm.
and so they're used to running into other hunters there, or scent from other hunters that they left behind. So that's just how they avoid that. But most of the time I will set up either just down below the bench or just above the bench. But now if at all possible, I'll set up to where I can shoot down below the bench and out on the bench too,
Yep.
That way I have both of them covered. But, and generally it's either one end or the other of it too. So,
yeah.
And a lot of it just has, if there's other terrain features that, come in to that bench, or, some kind of a cover, or, something like that, and of course, the more terrain features that you have coming together, and edge type habitat, we all know that bucks, like to travel, the edges of cover, and and they come through, the more of that you have coming together in one spot, I love spots like that. It creates just great travel corridors for them.
Yeah, and that's it's such a tough question for me to even ask you, because I seen it too. It's like every situation's different. You kind of gotta look at it, with your mind, and try to make sense of the situation. And I agree with what you're saying about the bucks not walking on the flat part of the bench there and being on those side hills, which is difficult to set up on, because say when you're down on the lower side of it, you got this steep drop off on that side. It feels like you're 50 feet up the tree, on one side, and you're 15 feet up or 10 feet up on the other. And it can make for some steep angles and everything else.
Yeah, it can definitely make it difficult to set up in. But yeah, it can be. It's really hard, especially for me, to describe. I'm more of a take you and show you kind of guy.
Uh-huh.
I have a hard time describing some of this stuff, but it's really odd, and I've been able to do this, since I was, I guess in my teens, but and I've even been standing there with some of my buddies. We'll be scouting or hunting or something other, and I can just visualize how a buck is going to move through an area, and they're like, I just don't see what you're seeing, but it, I can see it, and it just makes perfect sense to me. And the thing about it is I've done that time after time after time, and that's exactly, what will happen. I'll give you an example. I was hunting a big buck not too far from here at home, and I had actually found him the year before when I was shed hunting, and he was bringing a lot of tops out of the trees, that he was horning, and I called him Twister just because he was twisting all the trees in half when he would rub them, and but anyway, I had set up on the buck, and me and another of my buddies had backpacked back into this area. It was around 2.5 miles, and was planning on hunting the area for 3 days. And the first day, I never even seen a deer. The second day, I seen a doe, and she was kind of in a hollow over to my left, and she kind of took off running a little bit, but I never did see anything, and I just felt like that the way that she ran, that I felt like that, and of course this was about mid-morning, and I felt like that the buck that I was hunting was probably nosing around down there and running up the hill, and I felt like that he had went on out the ridge to where I felt like that he was bedding, and but about midday, I was sitting there in my stand, and I could look across this little hollow over toward the direction that I was expecting him to come from. And there's just a little trail that come around through there. And I thought, I need to get a little bit closer to that spot right there. So I eased down out of my tree, and I walked over there, and there's a rock. I don't know, it's about the size of a 55-gallon drum barrel. And I got up on that rock, looking out into that. It was kind of like a knob that was really thick with rhododendron and mountain laurel. And I felt like that he was bedding off into that point. But anyway, whenever I was standing there, I thought, no, you need to get back up that tree. And I said, because I feel like that he's going to come right through here. Well, I went and got back up my tree, and I'm sitting there, and about 30 to 45 minutes before dark, I looked over there, and he is standing exactly where I was at, just standing there. And but he ended up walking that trail, that real lightly used trail there, and but unfortunately my gun hang fired. It was a black powder rifle, and I missed him, so that wasn't a happy ending story. But that's just happened so many times. I just visualize, a buck coming through a specific spot in a very specific way, and that's exactly how they'll come. So
Yeah, it's funny. I hear that from you, and I have a couple of other, buddies that I would consider, really good hunters, and it's funny, they explain it the same way. And I've scouted with them, and even with my dad and stuff. They can they can see it happening. Sometimes they can't even explain it. They're just like, this is how it's gonna happen. This is how it's gonna move, and I'm sure that the experience and everything else is helps with all of that. But it's interesting how the visualization like that works.
Yeah, and see, like some of these questions that you've been asking me, and this, I think this is the 6th or 7th podcast that I've been on, and most everybody asks the same type of questions, and but really and truly, it is very hard to give an exact answer to any of these questions, because there's just so many variables out there, and and really until you're standing, in the woods in that spot, do you? I don't know. It's really hard for me to explain, but sometimes, places that they don't have any kind of specific topographic feature to them or anything like that, but it just looks right.
Yeah.
And whenever you find spots like that, you know that you found something special. And most of the time, it doesn't, if I'm hunting a specific buck and I have that kind of a feeling, it's generally just 3 or 4 hunts and I've killed him.
And Nathan, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and it's hard to put into words what you're seeing. Maybe it's a gift from God. I don't know, being able to see, that, but to put it into words, it's really difficult, and especially for me because I'm kind of a backwards type person. But I don't know. It would be easier for me to show you than to explain it to you.
Yeah, and I believe me, I completely understand. You've done a great job answering the questions because they're not. And I know this, and anybody else that hunts, mountain bucks knows there's not a quick answer or oh, you do this in every situation, it works. Otherwise, there'd be a lot more people being successful, if that was the case. I believe me, I completely understand that. There's just certain trends that you might, look out for. And that's the same thing, when I'm scouting online for an area before I go into a spot, I'm marking areas that look potentially good, but I don't know that until I walk in there. And then there's a little micro terrain feature you can't even see on a topo map, or something.
Exactly.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And it takes, there's no cheating learning that. It's experience and putting your time into, learning that. And usually it's by screwing it up.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And like you just said, when you're scouting new areas, you're looking for, there are definitely certain types of terrain features that, draw your eye, and you're naturally going to go look at those spots. But in my experience, most of the time, the spots that you end up, or myself, setting up in that look really, really good show up as nothing at all on a topo map. That bigger buck that I killed this year, the spot that I picked out to kill him in, I had actually, the way that happened is, I had scouted, I had hung cameras without actually scouting. I picked out some spots on topo map and satellite images, that were close to the equestrian trails. I hung cameras. I went back and checked the cameras, seen what bucks I had. And then the next time I was in there actually was the second weekend of black powder. And then I was planning on to be in there the next weekend. So actually I only had boots on the ground one day. And of course I wasn't, real thorough, but in my mind, you don't have to be really thorough to kill a big deer. And the reason I say that is once you've done it enough, you can kind of hit the high spots and know where you need to be. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
And, I had made a really big round in there that second Saturday of black powder rifle, which was the weekend after I killed that first buck. And then, rifle would be coming in the following Saturday. But anyway, just that from that one loop that I had made, I seen a few rubs and had a good idea of what I felt like the area the buck was using, and I was looking at it, all on. I use Backcountry Navigator Pro and Onyx. I switch back and forth between the two. Seem like Backcountry Navigator Pro has a little bit better topo maps, but I like some of the features of Onyx a little bit better. But anyway, just thinking about what I had seen, and I circled this one area that I never even went into, and I felt like that's where I want to kill that deer at. And actually, there's no. You could ask one of my buddies. I had circled that, and I told him, I said, I think that's where I need to be, and I hadn't been there. And as far as topographically, there was no feature whatsoever right there that would make you think that would be the spot. But I spent 2 days in that spot. I ended up killing him there.
Huh. Oh, that's interesting. And the thing that you mentioned there, it's going a little bit on a tangent, but like with as far as hitting the high levels when you're scouting and stuff, and that's why, like, if I'm trying to like check out a bunch of areas and speed scout it, so to speak, it's different than shed hunting. I'd say scouting and shed hunting are different things. I like both, but it depends on what I'm looking to get out of it, I guess. Do you kind of agree on that?
Absolutely, yeah. I like to shed hunt, and I do most of all my scouting, this time of year. So my number one priority is looking at new areas, and I definitely I scout and shed hunt, together, I guess you could say, but I'm sure I miss a lot of sheds because I'm looking for rubs and spots to set up in and stuff. But yeah, I love them both, and both of them are very important.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I definitely agree with that statement. It's a tough thing for me because like I feel like I'd be a better shed hunter when I found some of these areas that you could tell that they're feeding in a bunch, and if I actually sat back and grid searched it, I'll start doing it, and then I'll get distracted and want to go over there and check this out, and next thing you know, I'm 2 ridges over, and that seems to be the situation.
The way that I normally do, the way that I normally go about it is the only time I really grid search an area is if it's a high odd spot to find a shed. Otherwise, I'm hitting the high spots and, going from, spot to spot, checking for sign and stuff. But now once I do start getting into, areas that I feel like that there's probably an antler laying there, then, I'll definitely slow down and a lot more thorough. So.
And that's one of those things that you kind of get a feeling for after a while too. Like, I think there's an antler here, Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how many times I've been in a spot and just get that feeling, and I know that there's one there. And if you look hard enough, sure enough, there'll be one there. So.
Yeah. I've struggled more like shed hunting in the mountains versus the big woods, which I think are two separate things. I mean, there's a lot of similarities, but a lot of big differences. And I've had better luck shed hunting big woods areas than I have, actually what I would consider mountainous, terrain. But
yeah, it seems like especially around here where the deer population is not that great. Antlers can be far and few between. I average, which isn't great, by some standards, but I average between 15 to 25 a year. And boy, I put a lot of miles in trying to find those.
Yeah.
They're just very difficult just because of the nature of the terrain and, how thick it is, some areas up here, we'll have a rhododendron or a mountain laurel thicket that's, 1 or 2 square miles, and you about have to step on top of them to find them.
Do you hunt in any of those areas like that are that thick, or like how are some of your setups looking like that, or are you kind of on the edge of that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Well, I hunt, of course, the edge of them, and if there's some kind of a topographic feature back in the thick stuff, I definitely love those type of spots too. Especially if it's on a hillside. You'll hardly ever catch me hunting, up on top of a ridge, but most of the time, if there's a thick hillside and it has any kind of topographic feature down off on that hillside, that's most of the time that's where you'll find me set up.
Okay. And you were saying sometimes like on going back to the stand setups, but you're talking about, say there's a bench, and sometimes you set up below and sometimes you set up on top, and that's kind of coming down to, again, situational and what you feel like based on just the area where the buck's going to move.
Yes, exactly. And and during your scouting and stuff, you'll notice that down off the ends of points, not up on top now, but down off the end of it, you'll see a good rub line that comes around through there, or down off the edge of a bench. You'll see where the bucks are using through there. And, most hunters, they're going to set up, on the pretty flat area, but, sometimes they may see the buck, but most of the time they never get a shot at him.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I get what you're saying. And I don't know, do you ever hunt off the ground in some of those places, or are you mostly in a tree stand?
No, I'm mostly in a tree stand. I'm not a very good ground hunter, and one reason is because whenever I'm sitting there and I see a spot that on the next ridge, I gotta go check it out if I'm on the ground. And if I'm up a tree, I'm more likely to sit still. So
okay. So the one other thing that we touched on slightly earlier, but didn't really highlight it, was your egress and your entrance and your exit go into the stands. You talk about coming in from the bottoms, and kind of, is that your kind of rule of thumb there? Is that situational, or what does that kind of look like?
Well, it's definitely going to be situational, but now most of the time I'm parking my truck in a lower elevation that I'm hunting, so I'm almost always going uphill. But as far as getting in and out of a spot, I always try to make sure that I'm not going through my deer on my way to where I'm hunting. And, I'm always trying to make sure that, the wind is not blowing into the area that I'm expecting the deer to come from. And if I'm going through thick areas to get to where I'm hunting, I try to keep those areas trimmed out. That way, whenever I'm going through there, I'm not touching anything, I'm real big on, scent control. To me, it is very important if you expect to hunt a spot, more than one time, which in my opinion is very important here in the mountains, to hunt more than a spot, more than one time, but to get in and out without leaving any scent, so if you can pull that off, then the other deer aren't going to know that you're hunting them.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And as far as, was there any situations where you'd be coming from the top, or is it more or less that your truck's never going to be parked up high?
Yeah, sometimes, actually this year, that second buck that I killed, we were camped up on top of the mountain, and I was dropping down, to hunt this deer. So yeah, that was one time that, in particular, that, I was accessing the area from the top. Mm-hmm. And I was, very careful about how I was coming into it. I was making sure that I was coming in, from an angle that I did not expect him to be coming through, Yeah. So, and actually what he was doing is, see, the north side was, is pretty steep, and it runs down into some, more gently rolling topography, and there was really heavy feeding sign down in there, and the deer were actually bedding on the south side, coming across the top, and late in the evening and going down in the area where they were feeding, and then coming back up on top. And that's something else that you might want to touch on too, is bucks, in my opinion, during the rut, a lot of times bucks, how they travel will be perpendicular to, say, how the does are traveling. And that's exactly what this buck was doing. It's just a more efficient way for them to pick up the scent of a doe coming in and what have you. So.
Okay. Yeah. Explain that a little bit when you're talking about them traveling perpendicular to the way the does are traveling. Can you think of a scenario?
Well, I mean, that one there's a good scenario. You have trails coming from, the south side, crossing the top and going down off the north side. And they were probably going, 400 or 500 yards. And a lot of times bucks will work back and forth perpendicular, cutting across trails versus going, traveling with the does, up and down the mountain. And it's just a lot more efficient for those bucks to pick up on a doe coming in estrus by doing that, because, they're cutting across the trails and they're just going from trail to trail to trail, out through there. Instead of, if they get on one trail and go from one end of it to the other, they're not really, they're still smelling the same deer versus, if they're cutting across trails. Okay. If I explained that good enough.
No, you explained that really well. I think you explained that really well. And so with some of those those setups that we've been talking about, and with the rut, them running perpendicular there and everything else, are most of these stand setups for the rut, or is this does it not really matter what time that you're hunting these areas?
Well, it just depends. If it's October, you could actually set up like where I was hunting this year that I killed that buck in that situation. If you set up correctly, you could hunt both time periods. During October pre-rut and the rut. The way that I visualize it, and see bucks doing is, say during October when they're on more of a feeding pattern, their patterns are going to be more in parallel with other deer. Once it starts getting closer to the rut, then they're going to start traveling more perpendicular to the does. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it did. So when you're saying, as far as them running more parallel to them, say in October on a bed to feed, they're more going up and down the mountain versus running, around the sides of the
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and see whenever let's use the eastern facing slope that I was mentioned earlier about them bedding on, that works really good for them. Because whenever they get up from their bed, they're automatically headed west, which is the direction that the wind is coming from, most of the time. Mm-hmm. And as they're going out through there, that they got the wind in their favor, and they're crossing trails, that's coming off the mountain. And if there's cover around through there, which most of the time there are, just under the top, I mean, it's such a good situation for them because they can, they can pick up any scent of a doe that's, may have crossed the top of the mountain and, running down a ridge, and they got the cover to their advantage. They got the wind to their advantage. It just creates a great scenario for them.
Yeah, no, that you explained that really well. And I'm as I'm talking to you, I'm looking at a map. Actually one of the diagrams that you have in the article that I'll post up here on the website. But just looking at it and picturing it and visualizing it in my head, what you're saying, and then some back the experiences I've had with even this past year I was hunting a spot. It was out on the edge of this point, and I was just down over the edge, and up on top I'd found there were some acorns, so they were actually bedding lower and then coming up onto the top to feed, and those does were running straight up and over, where the bucks that I saw, which I didn't, in this particular spot, I didn't see any that were, I saw one that was probably a 3-year-old and the other ones were younger yet, but they were running, like you said, perpendicular to them, around on the side hill. And then they would, they kind of veered up onto the top, right as it was getting dark. So that's interesting.
Exactly. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But
I just try to take advantage of those, scenarios.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Huh. That I've never heard it explained that way before, and I think that's a great way, and I'm able to visualize it there pretty easily. Yeah. And like you said, it's all situational, taking the information that you're given there and everything and applying it to everyone's situation that's unique,
Exactly. I wish there was a silver bullet for every situation, but there's not. It's all situational. So, and sometimes it's really hard to describe those.
If there was a silver bullet for it, then it wouldn't be fun, or there wouldn't be any deer. So
that's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't know if, every year I go into a hunting season, in my head, I like to go in with a positive attitude, being confident, and every time they humble you pretty quickly. Whatever you think
they will.
You learn more.
Yep.
That's funny. Well, Nathan, is there anything else you can think of that you wanted to, cover, or leave any, last minute points here?
Gosh, I don't know. The biggest thing that I think that would help most people is just trying to think differently. If what you're doing year in, year out, which most hunters do, and they're not getting the results that they want, do something different. That's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results, and you've always heard that 10% of the hunters kill 90% of the big deer. And I believe that's, really, pretty accurate. And what separates those people from your average hunter has to be the way that they think and the decisions that they make, whenever they're in the woods. And so, that would be my biggest advice to anybody.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's really good and a good quote to kind of live by with just about anything. Not getting what you want by doing the same thing, change it.
Yep. And it applies to deer hunting as well. So.
Yep, for sure. All right. Well, Nathan, like I said, I'll be posting your article up here on the website, so everyone can head over to eastmeetswesthunt.com/journal and find his article here that's very detailed, laying out a lot of the things that we talked about here, with diagrams, with topo maps marked up. I mean, it's great. Nathan, I told you that before. I was really enjoyed it, and it's tough to talk about these things sometimes without visuals or anything there. And I think that this will be a good complement to this episode here. So, thank you for coming on and talking with me.
Yep, I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, and is there any other places that you have anything, whether that's social media or any other information out there that you want to point people in the direction of?
No, I'm pretty simple type of guy. Of course, I have my Instagram, and that's it. So I keep a pretty low profile.
Yeah, you do. But you're extremely successful, and just very intelligent when it comes to this stuff. So I appreciate you agreeing to come on and talk with me here.
Yep, appreciate you, buddy.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of East Meets West Hunt with your host, Bo Martonic. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit eastmeetswesthunt.com, Facebook at East Meets West Outdoors, and Instagram at East Meets West Hunt. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.